Now, I work in a national park as a park ranger, and I remembered something that happened one evening. I'd went out near our station to drink my coffee. It's kind of a ritual that I had, and it was important for me to stay awake and alert enough to do my job effectively at night, when I hear a really loud crash. Now, not even 1 feet next to me, a huge boulder smashes into the ground. It scares me how close it is, and I jump back. Before I really have time to react to this, I hear somebody shouting at me, "Hey, watch out. The aliens are coming, man. The aliens are coming. You have to hide." And then I see somebody with a very long beard, very unkempt hair, a very old hat and clothes who sprints past me. He sprints so quick that I honestly don't think he's human for a second. Now, I stood there completely grounded. I want to say I was brave, but I just realized that this guy was probably trying to kill me with the rock. Within a second, I snap into life and I quickly get into the station, report what's just happened and call the police, and we send out our search party. Now, our party found absolutely nothing and ordered the police, so that crazy person could still be out there waiting to throw rocks at people's heads and kill them. I'm just glad that he missed me. Me and a buddy of mine had been called out to go and investigate a tent that was put somewhere it shouldn't have been. You're not supposed to camp in this part of our forest, and there was an old army green tent set up. We're almost there when my buddy stops and says, "Hey, can you hear that?" I say, "What?" I can then very faintly make out the sounds of somebody singing. The more and more I listen to it, it's children singing Ring a Ring of Hoses. It sounds like maybe 4 or 5 of them. They all have different voices. This goes on for about 2 minutes, very faintly. I turn on my flashlight and have a look around in all directions. We cannot locate where the sound is coming from. It sounds like it's right next to us. We turn off the flashlights again and it stops, and we think maybe it's coming from the tent. Quite scared now, we go closer and closer to the tent until somebody emerges. We say, "Hey, you're not supposed to be here." He says, "Oh, I'm really sorry. I just needed to rest for a bit," and the guy was actually really nice and said that he didn't realize he wasn't supposed to be. We then ask him, does he know where the singing was coming from? And he looks at us and says no, he was about to ask the same question. He packs up his things and we show him the way back because it's dark. We start to set off and we hear children laughing, just like before. Now, the look of fear I've never seen in the other guys before. I must have had the exact same expression as we realize that something is off. We quickly scan the torches around and very quickly scan the area and can't find anything. We then make it hurriedly back to our relative safety. I did some research at the area and apparently there have been reports of similar things happening before. Children laughter in the night, but nobody's ever able to locate where the sound comes from or the accompanied singing. This is not my story, but my father's of when he was a park ranger. He absolutely loves the job. He describes to me how that you could see some of the most beautiful things in the world out there in nature that you almost become completely blind to when you live in a big city. We do live in a big city now, but we're going to change to live elsewhere soon. Now, my father tells me of one experience which really shook him up. Apparently, they kept on finding dolls scattered around. I mean, literally, just randomly there would be these dolls that they would see. They didn't know why it had got there or who put them there, and they seemed to be quite old. In fact, ancient, almost like they were 100 years old. They'd all be dressed exactly the same with a black dress on and short black hair. They always thought it was weird, but didn't know if somebody had left it there, so they'd just put them under trees. Now, my father had to survey a certain area for something that they were going to build, and he said that he had no problem doing this. Apparently it was such a beautiful day. There was beautiful red coloured flowers at the ground where he was walking, and the sun was shining very high in the sky. He said he couldn't have felt better. There was a beautiful lake to his left and these gorgeous trees around him. He said, "This is it. This is what made it for me. Moments like this. No one around, but just the trees, breathing in the freshest air that you can and just forgetting about everything." Saying that most of the time that he was in these states, it was almost like meditation, and his mind could wander peacefully through the surroundings around him. He's making his way over to the area that he has to survey, and suddenly, the beautiful scenic nature changes, and a heavy feeling comes over him. He said he can't quite describe it, and he felt abnormally cold. He doesn't normally feel cold when he's out here. He decides to step into the sunlight, and weirdly, he feels the same. He knew something was off now, and he takes a few moments just to scan his horizon and figure out what's going on, but he can't find anything. Thinking this is very bizarre, he stops for even longer now and takes in a few deep breaths to calm himself when a blood-curdling scream makes his chest reverberate violently. Apparently it took a few seconds for him to come back to normal, and he said that he felt the blood leave his body. He looked around trying to figure out just what on earth this could possibly be, and then he sees it. A doll has been placed on top of, I kid you not, probably almost 100-foot tree. How on earth that got up there, my dad does not know. And the weirdest thing is that it's facing towards him. He then said that immediately he got out of there. He said that he had to jog away for so long that his legs were killing him, and he had to just keep on pounding to get enough adrenaline so he wouldn't feel it. He said that he went to explain it to some of the other guys, and somebody who had also seen the dolls looked pretty concerned and said he would go back to investigate with him. Now they get back to that exact same spot, and what do you know, the doll isn't there. But this isn't where it ends. There's another doll in another tree way too high up for it to possibly have been put there by anyone. They never could explain it. Now my dad also has another similar experience, which was very scary to him too. He said that it was only about a month after this incident happened. Now apparently, all of the dolls eventually just disappeared and they didn't know where they went or why. But apparently when a group of them was still doing some surveying, they heard that scream, the one that my father had before, and again, all of them stopped dead in their tracks. They can tell that it's coming from somewhere towards the water, but none of them want to go. One of them who has binoculars says that you've got to look at this. Tell me exactly what you see. And my dad looks through the binoculars and can't see it at first until my friend guides him there. And they see another doll just floating in the center of the lake. They actually decided to leave the area this time and vowed to not investigate the dolls, and they knew something was off. After this they didn't have another sighting of one, and they never could solve exactly what it was. Now for the last story from my father, it's a pretty creepy one. Now apparently my dad was training somebody new, and he said to stop up here for a moment, and the other guy threw his bag down. Crash. A really loud metallic sound suddenly reverberates through them. They were both frozen into the spot and can't figure out what it is, and my dad says, "What on earth do you have in that backpack?" They then both look down and suddenly realise that somebody's put a bear trap on the trail. They were literally only milliseconds away from treading on it, and unfortunately it's got the new guy's bag. Because of the location of it, it could only have possibly been put there intentionally, but who on earth would have put a bear trap on the trail for somebody to stumble upon? Or maybe they were targeted. They did a good thorough search of the area, but unfortunately could never find anything else. It still haunts my dad to this day, and he's still quite paranoid about where he steps if he's in a new territory. I've done lots of different things in my time, and I've kind of lived lots of different lives, I guess you could say. I'm always one who's up for adventure and trying new things that are different and unique to me, and I find those very exciting. I have landed a current career which I'm in and a job that I actually quite like. So is my wife too, which is great, but I didn't always do this job. I was talking to a new colleague at work and we got talking about what kind of jobs we're doing before, and it really got me thinking, yes, of when I was a park ranger, the reason that you're all here listening to this. Well, for a few years after finishing my school, I didn't really know what I wanted to do, and there was a program that would send me to a different state. Long story short, I ended up staying there and I actually really like it. I'm actually still here today. After a couple of years of being in the state, I ended up signing up to become a park ranger. I actually had a few jobs though at the same time to get more money. I wanted to save up enough to be able to go to college, and luckily I was able to eventually, which is my career I have now. But at the time it seemed like worlds away, and I actually become a waiter. I hadn't done it before and the pay was not the best, but the good thing is we got lots and lots of tips and that was pretty cool. The problem with the job is that it's almost like if you did enough mistakes, they would just get rid of you very quickly, but it was easy to do in a high-paced environment like this. Sometimes you literally couldn't even go to the bathroom, which I think was a bit ridiculous, but hey, it is what it is. I loved this job, and I really liked the environment. I remember when we'd wake up, there was some large animals like deers and things like that would always come up to where we were staying in the main facility. You actually had to be really careful of them sometimes, especially if it was their rut season when they were looking to reproduce, because the males would get very aggressive, and you had to be careful. The other problem too is tourists would always stop their cars and try and take pictures and stuff, but they were just kind of oblivious to the danger of it all. And yeah, it was actually really dangerous to be there, so you well and truly had to watch out. Now I didn't mind though, but like I said, the job didn't pay that much money, but it was very close to my other job which I absolutely loved, which was being the ranger. I found it good, but I almost feel like I was doing so much that I couldn't appreciate the things that I had around me. It's something I still have now, but it was almost like I was a spring compressed and I couldn't really appreciate everything for what it was. But as soon as I got out there doing my ranger job, I'd very quickly forget about the stresses of being a waiter, and that was good. I could also soon forget the fact that being a waiter wasn't a permanent thing. It was kind of like temporary for the time, and I knew that, just I couldn't convince my brain of it. So I head out on some of my normal patrols and everything's grand. There's lots of people out here that I actually become friends with, and I'd get some regulars there who would just hike the trails. It was a pretty cool place to go hiking if you ever get out to these kinds of places, and I'd really recommend it to people who haven't tried it yet. I remember though, there was some weird smell that none of us could seem to escape from. It was almost like sulfury, but kind of different, almost metallic at the same time. It's the kind of thing that was almost like sharp, and it would make your nose feel cold. It's pretty weird. I wasn't the first to discover it, but I wasn't the last, and I remember some other staff reported it too. Apparently this actually happened in other places and not far from the restaurant that I was waiting in. And I thought, you know what, this is a bit weird. I was quite paranoid and thinking too scientifically in the presumption that it was a dangerous chemical that we weren't supposed to smell but could, or something leaking from the ground. I was paranoid maybe it was radon gas, but I didn't realise that you couldn't actually smell that, and we're in the open air anyway. My scientific knowledge has come a long way since then. Now, eventually, the smells seemed to go away, and things seemed to return back to normal. I was finishing up one of my shifts doing the waiting, and I was washing some dishes, and I noticed something strange. Outside of the window, a bit further away, I could see some kind of faint glow. I don't really know how to describe it. It was almost like a reddy colour, but had more of a green tinge to it. At first I presume it's a fire, but it doesn't act like how a fire would. I don't know, it just felt a little bit different. It looked kind of weird, and a little bit creepy actually. I just convinced myself it was nothing. I finish up on my washing and go outside to see what it is, then I realise that it's gone. I'm pretty sure it's some kind of reflection or something that I didn't realise is there, so I just go back to what I was doing. I remember just thinking, God, I can't wait to just escape and let my mind settle. I was kind of aware of the compression spring thing that I was talking about earlier where I was doing too much, but I was kind of just going with it at the same time, but I knew I needed to get out of there and just have a few hours at least of peace just to clear this up. Now eventually, these smells do pick up again, and weirdly, somebody else reported seeing a strange light in these woods. Now, this particular colleague reported them differently, saying that it seemed to be coming as more of a green embery glow, almost like where a fire once was, or just when you get the embers before something like that's about to die. He said that he just had a weird feeling like something was off. It was like all of his adrenal glands were firing and he just didn't know why. He said the smell was accompanied by it too. So now, I'm pretty convinced that it's just something we should be careful of, but nothing too harmful. I was paranoid again it was radioactive, just because, like I said, not the best at science then. And I thought, well, why else would it be glowing? Or maybe it's some kind of chemical fire, I don't know. I thought somebody had been stupid and actually left something out there and not told us. Or maybe somebody was illegally burning trash or something. And yeah, that was what I went with and a lot of the team did. We were pretty sure people were burning some kind of plastic that they really shouldn't have been, and that would explain the weird characteristics of this light and its glow. Now the thing is, we couldn't find it. We searched for quite a long time, and my god, we get to know the area well, so if there was anything there that shouldn't have been, we would have picked it up, but we couldn't see anything. We even had some cops actually putting in a report that they thought somebody was out there, because they said they saw something strange. They described it as a couple of lights moving and then suddenly vanishing, describing it this time as a kind of purple colour with a green one, but the green remained throughout. I could probably link the colour more closely to almost like a neon kind of green, but it's hard to describe. Now, another strange characteristic of this is that one of my colleagues said that his eyes genuinely burnt when he saw this. He actually got the closest out of all of us to whatever this is. He said that he was probably about 50 feet away, and he couldn't look at it, almost like the way that you can't stare at the sun or bright reflections or things like that. But he said he felt enticed to. Almost like everything went black around him and he just had that to stare at. I even noticed some vision problems too. I remembered after seeing this that I would look at a tree and it just looked like it was artificially placed there, almost like it had a stage light coming down onto it which wasn't there, and it just looked too high definition compared to the other trees. It was kind of trippy but pretty bizarre to pick up, and some of the other colleagues had the same thing too. Weirdly, it was also the same people who smelt whatever that was. Now, in a weird way, I actually began looking towards having my night shifts because, well, I'm going to encounter something pretty cool out here. At least that's what I was telling myself. The sense and urge to have adventure was still quite strong at this point in my life, so I'm up for it. Didn't have a wife then, didn't have a kid, and not many responsibilities, and the world was absolutely my oyster at this moment in time. Now, what to do other than chase this thing? Well, nothing. So I set out. I made a commitment to myself that if I actually saw this thing and can get within touching distance, then I'm going to be the first. If my eyes hurt, then yeah, it's time to stop and go back, but I was ready. And then nothing. For the next 2 weeks straight, absolutely nothing happened. I actually grow more and more tired of trying to hunt this thing. It's kind of like the perfect anticlimax where that your motivation is going on a negative correlation constantly spiraling down till you can't be bothered. And I couldn't be bothered. I was actually planning a trip to get away to Europe, and that starts to consume my thoughts and everything. And I decide that I'm gonna think better if I'm not tired and decide to plan it more in the day. So now I'm out there less in the dark anyway. So I'm doing my usual rounds, just investigating something that I needed to, and just going out, doing what we do, when I notice it. There's almost like a burning on my neck. It kind of feels like I'm getting a sunburn, and the smell is come back. I turn around slowly, and I see it, just for 1 second. Glowing almost too bright to be real, in a weird golden colour. Something is standing there raising its arms up to me. It doesn't really look like a person. It almost looks like it's wearing some kind of robes, but it doesn't have a head. I can describe them as white, but with gold detailing around the side, but it looks very alien. Almost like something which has come from a very wealthy thing, but not like anything on Earth, and something that's somehow spiritually higher than the rest of us. And then it vanished, almost like it was never there in the first place. I'm completely perplexed, trying to figure out what was that. I rubbed my eyes for a few seconds, and that's when I noticed something really strange. I can still see the silhouette of this thing burned into my eyes while they go back to normal. Okay, that's really, really odd, I think. Something was definitely off about this situation. I'm pretty sure my head isn't powerful enough for me to imagine that, and I wasn't even thinking of it. Last time I checked, I'd never seen anything like this, so what was I seeing? I look around, and there's almost like a mist that's formed. It's kind of like an extremely light fog, but I can see it everywhere. Again, it's not just my vision going weird, because I can clearly see that it's not in all areas. So what was it? I decide to head back now. I ended up finishing the rest of my tasks, and I get into our base. I start talking during my lunch break and tell one of my colleagues about what happened. He said that he's seen something similar too. But what's more strange is that he said that he had seen this in a dream, which I think is really weird. I asked him to describe it, and he's pretty much describing literally exactly what I'd seen too. Now that's pretty creepy, I think. Or is it something higher up? We start to discuss all kinds of possible things, guardian angels and God knows what else, but I'm a little shaken. And I eventually get back into my car and drive home and forget about it and start another shift at the restaurant. Now when I'm doing the dishes this time, I can't help but look out of the window, and for a second I'm sure I see a green flash of light and then nothing. Now again, I think this is pretty bizarre, but I try not to think of it too much. I convince myself that I've been going too hard, pushing to the absolute max, and this is what's happened. My body's just gotten tired. Maybe I was doing too much. Maybe 2 jobs at the same time is not the best for me. Maybe, just maybe, I can slow down for a bit and life will take its hand for me. But I can't do that. I have to keep pushing. But I have to find out what this thing is. It's really starting to bother me now. I wouldn't say I'm naturally an anxious person, but I was starting to feel a bit weird about everything. It almost felt like these strange occurrences were becoming all-consuming. Kind of like the people you get on the ghost TV shows when they say that the ghosts don't leave them, or poltergeist, or them things. I was getting a bit worried now because I thought, well, why can't I separate from work? Why am I thinking of this while I go to sleep? Why am I seeing it in my head so much? I felt like time was against me and I just needed to get to the bottom of it. So I continue onwards once more. I continue on to another shift, and just as I do so, As I'm handing over from the other guys, they say, "Hey, did you hear about what happened?" I say yeah and talk about a sports event that happened recently, but they're like, no, the light, that thing that you saw, somebody else saw it. I say, what do you mean? And apparently Raymond has seen the same thing as me. He's one of the other staff there. Apparently, he was out there doing his role when suddenly there's a bright light behind him. He turns around to see a tall figure wearing some white coloured gown, but this time associated with a more green glow. Again, can't see its face. It's too bright where its face should be, and it vanishes within a second. Now, I was happy I wasn't the only one seeing this, but apparently my colleague had actually got really shaken up by this, and that's somebody who never seems to care about much of anything. Well, I really want to find out what this is now. All of us agreed to stay well back and call law enforcement because clearly, if we encounter this thing, it's something that we're definitely not trained to deal with and don't want to deal with in the first place. Now me on the other hand, I'm the adventurer. I want to be the cool one who can just go after things and not be scared. It's weird thinking back now on how my mind was at the time, but that was my mind, so if I've got to investigate, then I've got to investigate. So I set out, and I start doing my job. Now again, things are normal. The next 3 days, nothing really happens. The only thing that was a bit weird was the mist seemed to pick up again, but because of the weather, I'm not really sure whether it is naturally occurring or not, but it felt strange. Now, on the fourth night, however, just as the sun goes down, I head out and something feels different now. It almost felt too perfect. The forest was a little bit too quiet compared to normal and it kind of scares me. I don't know why, it just freaks me out. Something about it was just off. Now, as I set out, I almost have that feeling like when you're in a dream. You know when you get to that fatigue point where your brain's kind of shutting down but you're still going? It was kind of like that. And I'm met with the smell again. I'd genuinely forgotten about the smell for a long time, but here it is again, and it instantly wakes me up. The smell seems to be getting stronger and stronger as it goes deeper into the woods. Now this area that I'm in, you can't actually see much further around the bend because how the path twists. The trees are quite thick at this point in time, so you don't really have much time to react to things or people which will come up on the path or trail behind you. It's okay. Sometimes it's kind of comforting because you know it's the same for whatever else is out there. But this felt different this time. It kind of gives me an uneasy feeling like I need to know what's about to happen next. The smell is ever increasing to the point that I put my shirt over my nose and continue on like that. Luckily my undershirt's quite long so it reaches my nose easily. And I stop in my tracks as I can see a faint green glow. I can't figure out where it's coming from, and I suddenly realise that it seems to be from in all directions now. I realise that I must be right on the trail with this thing, and I continue on until eventually it seems like the green light is fading now. I look around once more, but there's still nothing here for me. Again, but that's when I see it. It's almost blindingly bright. I can see a much brighter glow this time. It seems to be coming from a specific location now and getting brighter every second, and I pivot myself and I'm able to see it now. I'm met with something that's about 7 feet tall, almost appearing to have some kind of green robe on this time, mixed with white and gold, far too bright, and clothes which are flowing as though that they're stuck in the wind but there's no wind. The closer up towards whatever this thing's face is, the brighter it gets and the more my eyes hurt. It does this to the point that I can't make eye contact with whatever this is, if it does have eyes that is. I get this horribly overpowering feeling that whatever this is far too superior to me and can literally do whatever it wants to me, and I can only be here, left to face it. Now I don't know exactly how long that I was stood there for, but it gets to the point that I physically can't look at it, and I actually drop onto the ground trying to cover my eyes. It's so bright that I can actually see my bones through my fingers, and just some red around where my skin is, and suddenly there's darkness. I think I went blind for probably about 5 or so seconds because of how bright this thing was, until I'm able to actually see again. I then quickly get up and look around, and everything's how it should be. Just the smell, that awful smell, is still there. I pick up quite a good pace and I start running out of there fleeing. Luckily I was only about 20 minutes away from the station, and I get there in about 5 minutes or so. I was flat out exhausted when I get back to the station. Nobody else is there and it's only me at this time. I very quickly write down everything that's happened, and I try my absolute best not to panic too much. Now, the more that I calm down, the more I can actually see what I'd seen in my head. For probably a millisecond, I was finally able to see this thing clearly, and it seems to have horns with gold tips at the end and glowing eyes. I don't know what I'd seen, but it really terrified me. I ended up calling my best friend and describing what happened, and he said it might have been some kind of spirit that I encountered. I was very scared, and I actually radioed in to all colleagues in the surrounding areas to look out. Now what was really weird is I get a call to say that I've got to see my friend now. He doesn't say what's happened, but he says that I have to come quick, so yeah, that's exactly what I done. Now when I'm eventually able to make it over to him, that's when he tells me what he saw. He describes it as a tall figure, also with horns, kind of staring at him, and it was an incredibly bright thing and green coloured and glowing, and we both realised that what we saw was the exact same thing. Now in this moment I know that we have to keep going and doing our job, but we saw something really weird. We let everybody else aware of it, and we're hyper aware for what it could possibly be. Over the following weeks, there's fewer and fewer sightings of the glowing embers until eventually there's nothing. All these years later, I still have no idea what I saw to this day. I really hope that I don't ever have to see whatever that thing is again, because I don't think I'll be strong enough to stand to it this time. Now, in my later life, I ended up starting work as a ranger. Well, to be specific, I was on the fire lookouts most of the time, but with my job I had to alternate what I was doing. I'd like to share an experience from my past though that I haven't really been able to put my finger on. I've seen 1 or 2 strange things during my later life, but nothing really compared to this, and it's something that stayed with me. I never shared my experience with anyone because I was worried about being ridiculed, but I'd like to share it today. I'm somebody that used to go out into the woods a lot when I was younger. I used to do it more for fitness, to be honest. I found it was better if I could actually jog away from everyone because A, you wouldn't have to run into anyone, and B, I thought being out in the trees and with all the extra oxygen it's probably more healthy for me. And I've also done some research, well, at least I did at the time, to say that when you jog in the wild, you can also go across some better terrain, so apparently it's better conditioning and everything. Now, I didn't live very close to these areas, so I often had to hike over to them. It was okay though, I didn't have an issue with it. I found it to be a great time to clear my head. In fact, most of the times that I actually went jogging like this, it wasn't my original plan. It was instead something that kind of ended up just happening, you know. I'd go quite far, get close to where the forest started, and suddenly, I'd want to jog. And I did this on this particular day. Now, I decided not to jog immediately. Where I was, the terrain was pretty rough going, so I knew I was in prime area to twist my ankle. I'd actually done that before playing some sports, and it's never really been right. it can kind of go really weak suddenly. So if I was playing a sport and somebody tried to put a tackle in, I could suddenly fall to the ground and I didn't have much I could do about it. So with this in mind, I was being very cautious, just taking in everything. I thought I knew where I was going to, because I could see moss on the trees. Now I know that doesn't actually work really, but at the time I was convinced it would point north, so I kind of always thought I had a good sense of direction. The trees in this area are large and full of life, and that was a good thing. I was kind of walking across a hill at this point within the forest. It meant that if I fell, I could actually fall quite a long way down, and the trees also rose on my right side. So basically I didn't really want to jog here because I'm sure if I fell I'd get knocked out if I hit my head on a tree or who knows what. Now while walking, I noticed there's lots of wildlife around me that I haven't really noticed before. There's a few tiny birds that keep appearing on the track ahead of me, and they look pretty cool. I was worried that they were giant insects, but luckily it wasn't the case. For whatever reason, on this particular day, I decided not to jog immediately, or thereafter. I just decided that it's probably best if I walk and take in everything. I'm someone who likes to have deep thoughts. I realise now that I definitely overdid this and I was probably driving myself a bit insane with this process, but at the time it didn't really matter, because it was what worked for me. Now I didn't have that many good friends in my hometown. You had kind of like associates, I guess you would call them, but not the kind of people who would help you if you ever needed it. I had one friend, but he was pretty weird to be honest, and I was sort of aware of it at the time, but I wasn't able to actually leave him because there wasn't anyone else I could be friends with. I didn't realise this was stupid at the time, but it definitely was in the long run. I mean, pretty much all the time, all we would ever do is just go and watch a movie and order pizza. And there's nothing wrong with that, but when that's all you do, and you've also got someone talking rubbish about you behind your back, it can really throw you off. But I'm getting away from my story a bit much now. I come into another area where suddenly the sun pierces through and everything looks really beautiful. It was so bright it was kind of making the top of the trees appear white and the leaves almost transparent, which I thought was a really pretty thing. So I just continue on and take in the beauty of everything that's around me. I'm feeling pretty good at this point in time. Now, I come around the first bend and I realise that it levels off a little bit and I decide to start jogging. Now, I jog for a little while when suddenly I hear some people talking. I slow down to see who else is up here because I don't want to round a corner and run straight into somebody, but there seems to really be no one around. I can hear lots of people talking though. It sounds like about 6 or 7 or maybe 8, but I really can't make out a word they're saying. They're speaking alright, but I don't necessarily know what language it is. It's kind of like English but different. I can imagine it's how English would sound to people that don't understand it. That's the best way I can describe it. I think, well, there's probably just a good old group of joggers out here, and I can't be bothered to go into them. Again, my aim with this was just isolation, which I know probably wasn't a good idea, but that's what I was looking for. All is going well, until suddenly, their tones of voice completely change and it sounds much more aggressive. I kid you not, I almost take my next step past the tree when I hear screaming. It really sounds like someone's being attacked or maybe even killed, and with that, I move in a flash. I guess the adrenaline and whatever hormones are associated with that take over, because I don't really have to think about what I'm doing. I keep running and running, and I almost come into a zone with it where I'm thinking of nothing else but putting as much ground between me and the people screaming as I possibly can. It really sounded like someone was being tortured. I'd never heard it before, but in this specific situation, I was certain that I just had. Now, I managed to run for about a good 4 or so minutes before I get tired. It's not easy to sprint, especially when you're not going in a straight line. I actually taste some blood and my lungs really burn at this point, and I know I have to slow down a bit. Stupidly, I brought headphones but not water, so obviously that wasn't a great idea. I ended up taking off the headphones and throwing them when they get kind of stuck around my neck. I never found them again. I was so scared though that I didn't care about ditching them like this. I thought it would make more sound, and I stop on a log that I can rest on. I remain diligently silent, yet nothing pierces the quietness around me. I start to relax a little and think, well, maybe somebody twisted their ankle or broke their leg. Yeah, it could just be that, I tell myself. I eventually think that I can hear somebody or something rushing through the trees now, and I decide to take cover. I don't call out and I don't want my presence to be known, so I quickly duck under a fallen tree. I kind of crouch over and hold my knees together, trying to keep my silhouette as low profile as possible. I'd heard about it on a military show, and I was trying to do this. Now the problem was I only had my shorts and stuff, so they could probably see me pretty easily. I wasn't really going to blend into the background that well, but it was better than nothing. Eventually I hear what sounds like somebody passing. Weirdly, it sounds like it passes straight ahead of me, but I don't see anything, and I think this is a little bit weird. I think maybe it's just some animal that was disturbed or being chased, so I think, well, I better press on now. I was just trying to get as far away as I could, and I knew that if I continued this way, there was a good chance that I could follow it around in a big kind of like circle, and eventually get back to the relative safety of exiting the tree line. I was looking forward to this because I was actually starting to feel a little bit shaky. Now it's worth mentioning that I wasn't actually shaking because of fear. I was actually getting a little bit shaky because I was quite hungry now, and I must have depleted all of my resources doing this. So I really wanted to get back. I realised that I have one kind of snack bar with me, and I devoured that instantly. God, it felt so refreshing in that moment. Eventually, my thoughts decide that they can settle in a bit, and the rational part of my mind takes over and says, hey, it's probably just a group of hikers who aren't from here, and one of them probably broke their leg. So I was constantly waiting to hear the sirens of an ambulance or something, just to put my fears to bed, but it didn't come, however. What did instead was the realization that all of my senses are being heightened. Now, I realized suddenly that there's a tree stand not too far from where I am. I think, God, wouldn't it be great if I went up that? I think at least now I can actually get a perspective of what's around and maybe calm myself down a bit, so I make my way over there. I seem to be acutely aware of everything though in this situation, and I take a few steps up the ladder for it, and I realise that I should probably step down again. I can hear something, and I can see movement of trees and foliage moving not too far off from my west. So I take off running. I'm doing a jogger's pace. Now, I'm quite quick to be honest at this, and I'm able to maintain it forever, so this is what I do. I'm not in enough of a panic state to start sprinting again, and I know that I'm not going to be able to sprint for too long, so I decide that this is probably the best thing that I can do now. Luckily, the trail that I'm on now is much more even, and there's not all big rocks everywhere that I can probably trip over, so I'm feeling alright. Now, I picked this pace up for quite a long time. It was probably about 20 minutes, and I'm literally halfway back to where I need to be now. But with a quick glance over my shoulder, I realise that there's still movement. And when I hold my breath for long enough, I can hear that there's something coming behind me. I keep up this pace, trying my very best to get away from whatever this is, but it doesn't seem to be losing me. And then, it's accompanied by more voices. It sounds like those people I heard earlier. They're not speaking very often, but almost chanting. It really sounds like an angry mob is coming after me, or whoever that is behind me, but it seems like the thing behind me is latched on. I jog probably for another 10 minutes, and I'm not that far away from where I need to be, and that allows me to let my guard down a bit. And I stop and turn around, ready to face whatever it is that's been after me. I think maybe it's some kind of crazed jogger that's out here, and they're trying to get them to safety. I just don't know what it is. But the moment I stop and turn around, like literally the second my back turns and I can see, suddenly there's nothing. Silence once again. Now I'm getting a little bit creeped out now, because I think, well, it probably wasn't no animals, but I guess it could have been, but why did they just stop? Which again makes me very aware that they seem to know where I am. Again, I could just be doing this through coincidence because of the path that I'm on, but something felt really weird. But suddenly the feeling of being followed escapes, and I decide that I should climb a tree. I know this is pretty weird to say, but for whatever reason I decide that I'm going to get a pretty good perspective of what this is, and I can probably get out of sight, especially if I can go high enough. I'm not a very good climber though, and this proves to be more of a challenge than I expected to find, but I'm able to do so. Now, eventually I make it up the tree, and I decide just to stay here to catch my breath. I think it's called epoch or something, but it's when you have oxygen debt. I learnt about it a lot later, but basically my body was trying to get rid of the carbon dioxide, which had built up from running for so long. And I think the lactic acid has set in because my calves were absolutely obliterated now. I'm probably not the best in terms of actually having muscle mass, I'm still not. And I always thought this was going to be a higher association with things like this, but it felt like my legs were just absolute jello. I tried to move my legs around a bit now, but as I do so it makes the tree make a really loud sound. It's almost like something out of a comedy special, as I realise that my stupidity is starting to make the tree collapse on itself, or at least on the branch that I'm on, and I decide not to do that. But now, I can feel it. Something has locked onto me. It's kind of like a predator about to pounce, and I'm not the predator. I can hear something coming now, and I look around, and that's when I see it. I can only describe it as a person, but not how a person should look. What I was looking at was some kind of nightmarish figure. Where the skin should be is all red. There's no hair, just red everywhere, and some kind of liquid dripping off. And this thing with these horrible dark eyes makes eye contact with me and starts to walk towards my tree. I suddenly grip the tree extremely tightly, and I actually start bleeding from this but don't realise it. This thing starts walking towards me. I look around to see if there's any more, but as I turn back it's gone. I didn't realise it, but I went into complete shock at this. I actually slid halfway down the tree and eventually thud at the bottom. Without thinking about it, with my bloodied hands, I crawl over to a rock and hide under it. I don't know how long I was here for, but it took about an hour or so before I snapped out of it. I can't tell you what I'd described without tearing up in person, but it was like something from completely out of this world. Maybe it was a demon, I didn't know. I just knew it was time to get on the move again. This time when I get up, there's no uneasy feeling like I had before for some reason. I just feel completely drained, almost like a truck's hit me. Everything in my body hurt, and I was shaking. With my hands now shaking next to me, I pick up a light jogging pace, which eventually becomes a full sprint, until I get out of the woods. I couldn't bear to look behind myself, and instead, I just keep going forwards. I'm really shaking now, and for whatever reason, whenever I saw other people, it didn't bring any comfort to me, and everyone seems to be staring at me weirdly. Something just feels extremely off. And I can't stop thinking of that thing that I've seen the whole journey back home. I feel extremely paranoid, and I don't like that every person that I pass is staring through me, almost like I'm a ghost. Eventually I make it back home, I go to wash my hands off in the bathroom and I realise that my face is extremely pale and I haven't been able to close my mouth. I look like I was on drugs or something. I managed to go down and make myself some food, and I eventually crash out on my bed and fall asleep. I woke up the following day and everything's as it normally is, with my mum making me some breakfast. My mum commented that she thought I was unwell and asked what I'd been doing the previous day because I shouldn't be that tired, and I couldn't bear myself to explain what I'd seen to her. Instead, I just say, "Oh, nothing, I just went on a big hike and hurt my ankle," and she says, "Oh, let me look at that for you." Now in this moment, I kind of go on autopilot with my replies, and I can't really think much about what my mum is saying to me. I just want to escape from what happened, and eventually, life went on, and I buried that in the back of my mind for a long time, even eventually becoming a ranger. But that thing, I'll never forget it. Sometimes when I'm on my fire watches, I actually get really paranoid that I'm going to see that again. I don't know if anybody knows what that could have possibly been, but I'd be very interested to know if anybody's had any similar experiences to that. I can only describe it as a demon that escaped from hell and for whatever reason was latched onto me. Thankfully I haven't seen it since, but I can't be certain that I'm not going to see it again. One of the weirdest stories I've ever heard happened is not my own, but my father's. My father works as a forest service worker, and he had many weird encounters over his years. This one in particular gave me chills all throughout my childhood, and it made me constantly just question things. Now, I'll tell this exactly how my father's told me and how that he's wrote it down for me, so sit back and enjoy. I think it's truly bizarre. Now, to start out, everything's going pretty well in life. I'm happy and my wife is now pregnant. Now this is going to be our second child. We already had our other one who's about 1 now, and we're really excited to have a second. We had a boy and we were hoping for another girl. It turned out that we had another boy, but that was just as much joy into our lives. Those who haven't experienced parenthood don't understand how it changes your life sometimes, and how it changes your approach to taking risks. I know that I certainly had the same feeling too. Now, where I was based at for my job, I didn't really encounter anything too heavy. I hadn't been working this role for that many years, and there was other more experienced guys out there. In fact, a lot of the time I'd actually get quite frustrated because I really truly wanted to do more, but I just wasn't able to. Sometimes there would be things that the other guys would know that I could do, and they would just rush off to do it before I had the chance to, and it was so frustrating. I enjoyed being out there, don't get me wrong, but I was kind of stuck doing more computer stuff and just, I guess, the boring things. Now, at this place, I knew that I could progress, but it was going to take years. They basically offered me all the training and everything, but my god, it was slow. The thing was, I was probably smarter than all of the people there, just not being given any opportunities that I needed to progress. It was almost like they'd given me this form, and it said everything I needed to do, but there were holes in it that they couldn't see, and it made me feel really uncomfortable. I was quite tempted to join the Navy. I actually wanted to become a Navy SEAL at the time. It wasn't really possible because of some of the injuries I had, but I know that if I really pushed myself, I probably could have overcome them. But the problem was, even sometimes when I was doing this job, even just hiking around and doing my normal things, I would have a pain that I couldn't seem to stop from the bottom of my foot. I actually still have issues with it today. I'm not quite sure why it started, but yeah, it's just something I get on with. So on this particular day, it was just the same. There was more exciting call-outs and things to go and do, but literally before I could even get to the radio to say I would do it, someone would say I'm on it and would already be up there with their coffee in their hand, taking the last sips of their coffee before flying on out the door and to go and have all the fun. yeah, it kind of really sucked doing this, but I guess it gave me more time to think and just relax a bit. The problem is, if you're like me, that time very quickly lends to boredom. I started going through some of the records and some of the reports. I basically had to reorganize them because some people in this office area, they would just throw everything onto a desk and not do anything. They would only look for items if they needed it, which of course is a very stupid idea and wastes everyone's time, but back in my day, I guess that's how it was. So I start reading through some reports. There was a few pretty creepy things on there. Some people would say that they had a feeling, like an intense feeling of fear that they couldn't describe, accompanied by a knocking on some of the trees. They were never able to locate the source of this sound and they thought it was just animals, but it came up quite often over the years. Then I heard a really strange one. Apparently, there was a ranger that worked here, and a lot of the other people thought that he was going crazy. I was reading a second-hand account of what had happened to him. Apparently, something had spoke to him and told him the future. Weirdly though, when I looked back through another account, which was more recent than that one, some of the things that he said actually come true. And the person making the report actually noted that and how weird it was. Upon further investigation, it turned out that this person thought that he had spoke to beings or something. I don't know, kind of like aliens? They didn't describe it very well, just very vaguely. Now, it seems like many of these cases were dismissed. There were other weird things too, like a specific area where you'd feel very hot, completely unnaturally, to the point that you'd actually question if there was some kind of hot spring there, or something weird that shouldn't have been there, but again, they could never find the source of it. The thing that made this even more bizarre is that eventually the plants and trees and everything in the area would start to die, so you basically knew for certain that something was definitely off there. Now, I decided that I had to get out and do the very minimum just to not be in the office, and that's what I did. I remembered setting out, and I was being a little bit more paranoid than normal. I think all these stories were just playing in my head. I remembered I kept thinking that I saw something walking through the tree line above, ahead of me, always maintaining the higher ground. It kind of just trailed alongside me. It's really hard to describe, but was truly creepy. Now, I don't know what it was, but I think it was some kind of large animal there. Not big enough to be a bear, but certainly weird. I did think maybe it was a hiker out there, but it wasn't possible. I thought that was bizarre. I remember thinking to myself that you've just learnt the power of human potential in the mind, and it was pretty scary to me. Now, life goes on. We probably get to about a month or 6 weeks in, and again, they're just not training me properly. It's kind of really annoying because they'll complain at me for doing something when it's exactly how somebody's told me to do it. And they'll say, oh no, just do it confidently. But then they'll say, why did you do that? And you'll explain that's how you're trained, and they wouldn't seem to listen, and it was kind of like a hostile group. I didn't end up staying there for too long, but I'll get to that later. So what do? Once again, get reserved to balancing the books and just doing the normal work. Now, this is actually at a time before we had computers, so it did make days very boring too. The problem I found is that some people just did not have good handwriting. I've never been the best at reading others' handwriting, but especially in these situations, my god, it was like some of these people had honestly made an effort to write as illegible as possible. And again, if you can't read it, they complain, so I kind of become an expert of reading these things eventually. And again, every so often there's weird reports. I realise too, quite often when it's recorded, people just think, oh, it's the other guy not paying attention. Maybe he wants everyone to look at him and stuff like that. At least that's on the report conclusion, but I had a feeling that something was off when I kept on seeing the reportings of some kind of beings out there. This spanned over a number of years too, and long before I was there. They all seemed to be described as relatively the same. They called them the forest walkers. Apparently they seemed to be quite tall, and they would walk in almost a weird limp motion. The weird thing is that they would be silent too, and if you approached them, weird things would happen. Some people said they felt almost like they were high. Others said that they would just know things they couldn't have otherwise and stuff like that. I don't know if I believe in the supernatural that much, or at least at the time I didn't, but I just considered that these were just things that happen when you've been out in the woods for too long by yourself. Now eventually as time increased, and I started complaining to the higher ups about the issues I was having, I started to get out more and do more interesting things. I even got to rescue a few people too, which is a really cool feeling. I don't know if you've ever experienced it before, but there's something so cool about knowing that you preserved human life. You stepped in and you made a big difference and impact for someone. It's not something I'd felt before in other jobs too, so I was quite happy. Now, as I go out for a patrol one evening, I remembered having a strange feeling that the air was different. There was almost some kind of metallic smell that I couldn't quite describe. I was concerned that I had some kind of illness or that I accidentally got something on my nose, but no matter how much I wipe my nose, I can't seem to get rid of the feeling. And there was almost some kind of static in the air. You know, like when you have static electric and just before you feel the buzz, it was kind of like that. Now that's when I feel something. I can tell something's looking at me and I stop to turn around and see what it is. And then I can make out some kind of figure. It's probably about 20 feet away. It's wearing kind of like a dark coloured robe, but when it gets closer it appears more white. It walks with a weird limp and I can't believe my eyes. I actually rub my eyes quickly, not sure for a second if I'm dreaming, and it's gone. Now I think this is pretty creepy. I want to figure out what this is, so filled with excitement I actually jogged towards where it was. Now I couldn't tell you too much else about it, but just that it completely vanished. I probably spent another hour myself actually searching the surrounding areas just to see if I could find something, anything there to explain what I'd just seen, but alas, I come up blank. There's nothing there but myself. Now I'm actually a little bit irritated because I don't want to seem stupid. I really don't want to become like one of the people whose stories I've read, probably to be dismissed later on the same way that I dismissed some of theirs. But currently, it seems like I'm going to have no option but for that to be the case for myself. Yeah, it sucked really. I go back eventually and tell them what happened. Now, no one believes me, which is what I expected, and they say, yeah, you're too junior to be going out there and investigating things like this. I was pretty fed up again. I come from a role before where I was very well respected, and honestly, the way I was being treated was really annoying me. Now, a few months go on, and it becomes winter, and the going gets a little bit more tough really. It was pretty cold out there. I mean, uncomfortably so for myself. Now, I remembered on one particular day, I can't tell you specifically what I was doing, I just remembered that I was out there, that I spotted something weird, I mean really bizarre. There were these small figures, kind of limping around in the woods, again silently. Now I can't believe what I'm seeing. They're probably about 5 feet tall now, and in more of a white coloured gown kind of thing. Like I said, I didn't know what this was. I thought maybe it was something from Halloween, like decorations people put out there. And I actually wasn't too scared now. I was convinced that this wasn't actually a real thing or threat or danger, so I decided to step back and very slowly follow these things. Now I didn't look behind myself, so there could have been more, but these things just kept on marching on, kind of down the path for a good 10 minutes longer. Now they never once seemed to notice me or so much as turn around, so again, I'm still not entirely sure what I'm seeing, but I think it's some kind of Halloween decoration that someone's playing around with. I don't know, it could be a cult, it could be anything, but I'm not too worried. I don't know if it was the size of them or what, but I just wasn't concerned. Also, there seemed to be nature interacting normally around, so that meant that these things weren't a threat, at least I thought. So this continues on until eventually they all stop at something. I stopped too, and I can see about 4 of them. I was incredibly curious as to what they were looking at, but there's no real way for me to be able to see where I'm based currently. I get closer and closer and realise that I'm going to have to take the long way round now to figure out what it is. I decide to take a stealthy approach, and I try and walk very slowly through the foliage and get around. I do make it to a pretty good horizon, and I can see in front, and I still can't figure out what they're looking at. Now I'm sure these are people now, so I become a little bit more confident, and I walk down even closer to where they are. Eventually, I ended up crashing through some of the brush, and I decide that I'm going to be more present now. Obviously these people know that I'm here, so what's the point of trying to hide away from them? I go a little bit quicker now, and eventually go round to where I think that they're facing, and I can't see their actual faces. It's kind of just dark where that their faces are completely covered up in something. Now, I crouch down to get a better look at them, and suddenly, I can hear voices in my head. They don't sound like voices I ever heard before too, and it's almost like my own voice but different. And I keep hearing different things that haven't happened yet. I hear about the birth of my son and know that it's going to be a boy. I know exactly what he's going to look like, how my career's going to go, what my wife's going to do, and some of the hardships that come up and who's going to pass away in my family. It actually makes me incredibly emotional at this point, and I almost feel like it's too much and start to cry a bit. I ended up kind of just becoming overwhelmed with my emotions, and I fall back into the dirt and stare up at the sky. The sky's very bright today, and it actually looks quite nice. After a moment, I kind of stop hearing the voices so much. They kind of just slowly fade out, like somebody slowly turning down the volume on a record, and I get up. I realise now that whatever these things are has gone now, and I'm just here alone, very confused as to what's actually just happened to me. I get up, and I'm sure there's going to be an explanation for this. I ended up scouring around for probably another hour and a half until I conclude that nothing's here. That's when my panic finally catches up with me, and I decide that I need to get back as quick as possible. I start making my way there. I eventually get back to the station and immediately write down my report. I didn't speak to anybody else about what had happened, and that's when I'm confused. I suddenly realised that what I was reading was very similar to some of the reports of what had happened years before. The ones where that people had considered the guys that were reporting it a little bit crazy or seeing things. And for that reason, I actually took the report and ended up throwing it into the trash. I didn't want my colleagues to think I was crazy. I mean, I didn't like most of them to begin with. I knew that this was going to hurt me moving on to the other areas that I wanted to work, so there was going to be no benefit of me actually posting this. And I ended up moving on and working as a ranger in different areas and doing different kinds of roles too, even being a fire service worker. Now here's the weird thing. I only realised it much later, but I did have a son, and he looked exactly like I knew he would. The job that I changed into is exactly what I heard I would. My wife's role too. Also, some family members that died, they were the exact people who I was told would do so as well. Now suddenly I felt kind of a weird fear come over me, almost like a wash and flood of emotions coming back, realising that something had contacted me back then, and for whatever reason wanted me to know what was going to happen. I can't put my finger on why this happened or how it happened to me. I just know what I saw was real, and that I wasn't the only person that saw those kinds of things out there. Lots of my other colleagues had experienced some very similar things, and I just don't know what to make of it all.